Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We appreciate you joining us. For those who are coming back, thanks for coming back and welcome back. Those who are new, welcome for the first time. We hope you like what we have to talk about today, and if you do, go ahead and like and subscribe. My name is Zane Hamilton. I am with the Solutions Architecture team here at CIQ, and today I have Neil Hanlon and Gregory Kurtzer with me to talk about Rocky Linux security. So why don't we jump in, guys, and talk about? Sorry, Neil.
Oh, I was just saying, hey.
You want to introduce yourself, Neil? You've been on this before.
No.
Yeah,
I'd be happy to.
Come on. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Neil Hanlon. I'm a solutions architect here at CIQ, and I'm also involved with the Rocky Linux team.
Perfect. Greg, everybody knows Greg, but say hi.
Hi, I'm Greg.
Perfect. So one of the things that I want to talk about first, guys, is Secure Boot. I know that was a big deal moving into Rocky Linux 8.5, was getting Secure Boot ready and enabled and ready to go. So tell us a little bit about Secure Boot. What is it? How is it beneficial? And things to watch out for.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So Secure Boot is part of UEFI, which is the kind of next generation of BIOS boot, the legacy BIOS boot, and it was developed in response to malware rootkits in particular that were able to get in, replace that bootloader, that first stage bootloader in your environment. And it's essentially a cryptographic way of ensuring that the operating system that you're trying to boot from is not a virus. And that's kind of done right now through a central authority through Microsoft. And they have a portal where we go and upload our certificate and have them cross-sign it, so it's valid for the certificate that's loaded into a piece of hardware that's soldered onto your motherboard if you have a new computer, called the TPM, or a trusted platform module. And that trusted platform module enables secure storage of encrypted secrets like certificates and keys. And so what this allows us to do is have the Secure Boot environment where Microsoft has validated that the bootloader that Rocky has built is not a virus, essentially. And it's also built in a secure, trusted environment that we maintain on the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation. And then we essentially, that step there allows you to ensure that when you're booting Rocky, you're getting Rocky and not something else.
So is there anything special that you have to do to enable Secure Boot whenever you're doing this with Rocky?
As long as you kind of have relatively recent hardware, and by relatively recent, I mean since probably 2012, 2013, and we know there's systems out there that are older and still good and still able to run stuff. So if you have some older stuff, there may be incompatibilities with the shim due to kind of hardware design issues early on, but I think those are kind of few and far between. So most of the time, especially if you have like a new laptop or something, you can just kind of boot up, and Secure Boot should be enabled by default if you're using Rocky Linux 8.5.
I have a funny story with regards to this. So I just got a new laptop. By the way, the new Dell XPS 15 with OLED display is really awesome, and it works with Rocky totally out of the box. Well, almost totally. Apparently the audio had a little bit of an issue, and I patched the kernel, rebuilt the kernel, and tried to boot on this kernel. And Secure Boot came right out and basically did exactly what it was designed to do, which is to stop viruses and people like me from injecting things into the bootloader. And it blocked me. I actually then had to go into the BIOS and disable Secure Boot to run my kernel to test the audio patch that I put in there, and it worked. Yeah, Secure Boot, totally cool, and it does give that validity on the operating system that you want to be running, and stops you from getting viruses and have weird, wannabe kernel hackers like me playing with your system.
That's a great point too, and something else to bring up with Secure Boot is if you're relying on any custom kernel modules or third-party drivers that might be coming from like EL repo or some of those other places, or indeed, if you're using a different kernel altogether, like one from EL repo, those wouldn't have the Rocky Linux Secure Boot on them. But if you're using those custom drivers, then you may also have to disable Secure Boot or load the certificates that those are signed with into your into your TPM into the secure boot trusted storage so that you can boot off those. And you can do that with the kernel that you built too. It just you'd have to generate your own keys and load them in yourself to validate your own computer that you're building your own kernel. So thankfully, not a lot of us have to build kernels every day.
Except Greg.
Except Greg.
Did you go back through and make your kernel work? Did you go through and make your own keys?
No, I didn't make my own keys. I just disabled it, but the kernel fix for audio does work, and so I'm now doing what I can to bribe the kernel folks on Rocky to let my patch in. It's already upstream, so it's not like I created it, but but it works. It's awesome. And now that laptop, the XPS 15 again, OLED display, touchscreen, it's seriously awesome.
Does the touchscreen work in Linux?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
On Rocky, yeah, everything works perfectly right from the install. I didn't even have to make any BIOS changes, well, until I threw my own kernel in there. I didn't even have to make any BIOS changes, nothing. Everything just worked.
So have you found yourself going and poking your other laptops as you're trying to work on them? You forget that they're not all touchscreen?
You know how many times I've done that?
Oh, yeah. I've been sitting in meetings with people who are used to using the Microsoft Surface, and they'll have somebody else's machine. They're sitting there poking people's monitors and knocking them over. It's hilarious. So we got a question. How's the validity of a runtime kernel module validated as part of secure boot? Does the kernel verify them on insertion?
That's a great question. I'm not 100% sure, and I can circle back with our folks that are more well-versed in the specifics of how that works to get a great answer. But I just kind of spitballing off the top of my head, I would imagine that they would have to be verified on insertion. And they would often, I believe how it would work if you try to load one that isn't signed while it's running, it would essentially taint the kernel and cause possibly a recoverable error to come back. But I'll have to try that out. And I think we can certainly get an answer for exactly how the runtime modules are validated.
Sorry,
I might be able to get you, Neil, I may be able to get you a malicious kernel module or two if you want. You want to test?
Sounds fun. Sounds fun. So when we start talking about and looking at Rocky security, I think it's important to kind of talk about, from a community standpoint, what is Rocky security like? Is there anything special that we do around that?
Yeah, security is something that we were very focused on from the very beginning while building out Rocky Linux over a year ago now, which is crazy. But it was foundational to a lot of the questions or the answers to the questions that we were asking about how we were going to design access to systems and who has access to keys, for example, for secure boot, and lots of other things that we are doing, not necessarily different than anyone else, but in what we feel is the best practices in the current age where we are with practicing least privilege and only giving people access to the things that they absolutely need to have access to. And that's something that we believe is also coming from the transparency side of what the organization is doing. To that end, we have all of our security updates that we're grabbing are coming from RSS feeds from upstream and notifications, and we actually have a coming site that's going to be tracking when those packages are imported and released to the public mirrors, so we can see when they were released in Red Hat and when they're coming out, when they were imported into Rocky's Git, and then when we're releasing them as well. As well as, we in the past few months, we've gotten some more integration around tooling that's commonly used in the enterprise environment, such as NESSUS for scanning, as well as we recently had a sys workbench, our sys community created around Rocky Linux so that we can get a workbench in for validating the Center for Internet Security's benchmarks across Rocky Linux as well.
I can jump in on that too, because we also have, so we've been working on FIPS, for example. So CIQ is funding the development and certification of FIPS 140-3 for Rocky Linux 8.5. That is currently underway, and that will give various organizations, and I know federal is really interested in this. It'll give them the confidence with our crypto implementations. There we go. On what we've done with Rocky Linux, and that will be available as well here coming up fairly soon. There's one more aspect that I'd like to just kind of touch on real quick, which is if you look at most of the critical CVEs that are out there, one of the most common mechanisms or vectors to exploit hosts and applications is buffer overflows. And in a buffer overflow attack, basically what they're doing is they're taking some sort of input data or input stream, and they're overloading a buffer that was not being properly checked within the source code, and they overload that buffer. And they overload it to the point where they know another function can basically come in and actually execute portion of that memory stream, thinking that it's the function or another piece of that software. So they basically buffer overflow it, and then they put in a malicious piece of code as part of that buffer overflow. So this is one of the most common ways that hackers and malicious users are using to basically run malicious code on systems. We're working with a technology right now that was originally designed for embedded systems, but we're applying this to the entire operating system. And what it will allow us to do is create a moving target defense of that memory segment, of that memory of the application. So basically, at a high level view, it will randomize all of those different entry points for arrays, for variables, for functions, and whatnot within the basically when the application is started. It will randomize that, which will basically, it won't stop a buffer overflow. But it will pretty much make them completely useless for utilizing a buffer overflow to run malicious code through the application. And we're going to be applying that to the entire operating system. What's really cool about it is it changes the API. It doesn't change the API at all, doesn't change the ABI, and it doesn't add any performance impact to running this. Basically what it is some build chain modifications that we're making on our side, and we're going to be adding value on top of the community open Rocky, and basically CIQ is going to be offering hardened packages and hardened capabilities on top of Rocky that's going to basically mitigate and block these buffer overflow attacks, which, if I were to take a guess, is probably 40 to 50% of all of the high severity CVEs that you have. So this means that we're going to be able to block past, present, and future exploits moving forward. So we're really excited about this. And again, this is moving target defense.
So Greg, you said one thing that's important is we do it for the operating system, but is there the ability, as a software developer, can I extend that onto my software as well?
Yes. So we're figuring out how best to do that, because that's part of our build tool chain that we're going to be using for building some of these packages. And yeah, we will figure out how to make that happen. It's probably going to be licensing of that tool chain to customers who want to compile their software with that tool chain. The other thing I didn't mention, but I think it's important, is this entire moving defense model exists in run space or user space. So it's a runtime feature. It's not a kernel feature. What this means is we can actually apply it to a container, and wherever that container goes and moves, that container will also have this moving target defense model within it. So it's super powerful. It's very easy to move around and do different things with, and we're really looking forward to bringing this out to market. And people should be seeing this in Q2, so pretty soon.
Awesome. So no, we talk a lot about the Rocky build system and how it's different than some of the others, how we're trying to make it more open, but how does the build system we have offer additional trust to the resulting packages that come out that make up Rocky Linux?
Sure, yeah, and so just to clarify, we currently are using Rocky is currently using the Fedora build tools, so Koji, module build service, those sorts of artifacts to build the sources for CentOS 8, and those tools are awesome. They take a lot of time to wrap your head around, but once you get them up and running and are running them in an environment, they work great. What we found when we were learning about these tools is that they didn't integrate great into the tool chains that we wanted to use and wanted to try and integrate into our stacks in a more cloud native way. One of the reasons that a lot of the tools like Koji MBS work really well is because the folks that are developing them are the same ones that are using them, and they have the expertise and the knowledge to make those services and tooling work really well, and they have it all built into their existing stacks and services. And so what resulted from all of this was essentially a build system that we are calling Peridot, which Mustafa, one of the software engineers here and one of the community members at Rocky Linux, did a presentation on at FOSDEM a couple of weeks ago. I think we can link to that probably in the description. And one of the things that we're really just trying to do with the entire build system, including with Peridot and the previous build system, which will continue to be used for the 8.x train for Rocky, is provide better transparency and more transparency into everything that goes on, from the sources that we're ingesting upstream from git.centos.org to the artifacts that we publish down at dl.rockylinux.org. We want that pipeline and that process to be fully transparent and for you to be able to validate the entire stack down from what artifact was pulled, what patches were applied, where it went after that, and have a software bill of materials essentially for the operating system. And Peridot allows us to integrate plugins that we can add things like security, and we can integrate with CI/CD pipelines and notify people. And it's just very extensible very extensible platform that will enable us to be more transparent and hopefully enable better security for us in the long run.
So Neil, Peridot's really going to be for Rocky 9 moving forward, right?
That's what we're targeting right now, as well as for special interest groups that might be looking at wanting to add value on top of Rocky and release packages there.
Okay. Very good. What about ERRATA? How do we handle that?
So ERRATA is part of kind of the same system. Essentially, we're pulling those sources from upstream and validating them and reissuing them as Rocky Linux security updates to errata.rockylinux.org. And so you can go to that website and see a list of the notification or the security vulnerabilities that have been released and what their IDs are and all of that, as well as has an API with a version 2 coming soon with some fixes, some bug fixes that allows anyone, including security vendors like NESSUS and Tenable, to integrate with that to find out about the security vulnerabilities as they're released. And I believe the V2 of that API is also going to come with an RSS feed so that users can subscribe to that if they want to get notifications.
Very nice. So I know, like a lot of people, I just run yum update, move along. Don't really pay attention, but what's the best way to actually view what is available for security patches without just blindly doing what I do?
That is a great question. So I think probably the best way is
to not do what I do.
Well, to not do what you do. Well, so right, there's a bunch of different ways. There is the errata.rockylinux.org website. Has the API, as I mentioned. There's going to be an RSS feed coming for that. The second way would be the Rocky Linux mailing list. We send out updates as soon as we publish images to the mirrors, and they can start pulling them down. So that happens maybe 24 to 48 hours after we release a patch. It can take to circulate to all of the mirrors in the network, but it'll be available right then when we send that email. And it will be available right when you send that email on download.rockylinux.org, and you can pull it from there, and you can subscribe for notifications about those emails at lists.resf.org. And we have a list there called Rocky Announce that has announcements made about all of the mailing lists, or all of the packages and any updates that might be coming in. So there's two ways. And the third way, I have a short little demo here on a container that you can use DNF to see exactly what updates you need on your system right now.
Daniel and I had this conversation earlier. I can't get used to DNF yet. I still have young. It's just the default. It's the only way my brain works still.
Let's see. Let me share my screen here.
While you're doing that, Zane, don't feel bad. I know many very large enterprise sites that basically just do a yum update in cron every night. So,
oh boy,
yeah. So even professional, big, huge sites I know that are doing that. I'm not suggesting that that's the best way of doing it. As a matter of fact, I would suggest the opposite. There are probably better ways of doing it, but don't feel bad. You're in good company.
A way.
Sorry, just some technical difficulties.
No worries, Neil. And Neil and I were talking earlier about living through going through scanning for different entities that need to do scanning and are paying through PCI audits and FAA audits. Fun stuff. I'm sure you've never been through one of those, Craig.
Not an FAA audit.
Yeah, that was fun. Every year went through an FAA audit. Those were interesting.
At my tenure at Department of Energy, there was one point where we had a training course on how to deal with being interrogated by intelligence officers. That was fun.
Nice.
The one thing that I'll share for everybody here, if anyone's curious, most of these interrogations revolve around the idea of awkward silence. So they'll ask a question, you'll answer, and then they'll keep staring at you as if they're waiting for something else. And the amount of people that will just willingly give up and just keep talking and just keep sharing and blabbing all sorts of information is actually how they get most of their info. So get very used to awkward silences. And when you've answered, you be quiet and you stare back at them.
Love it. Love it.
Well, I got my screen shared. That was an adventure, as sometimes it can be to share screens on Linux. But so I have a container here, and thank you all for filling time. I've got a container here running Rocky Linux 8. I just pulled this from Docker Hub. We also have them available on quay.io, as well as I think where the Amazon Container Registry now pulls in Docker Hub images. So this DNF update info command has a bunch of different options, and one of them can just list out what vulnerabilities are currently open for the system that you have installed. And so it lists here the vulnerability ID or the advisory ID, what type it is. So these are moderate security vulnerabilities, but in the future, or there could be bugs that instead of security updates, as well as the name, and this is the name version architecture, just string something here. And so there's a couple of different ways that we can install updates from here if you don't want to just see them. Well, first of which is we can show information about all of those and get more information like the CVE number. And in fact, let's just go ahead and grab that CVE number. We're going to go DNF install CVE, and not install, but update. And then we're going to say yes, and yes again. And so that command there, we took the CVE number and passed it into DNF, and it went and grabbed that using the metadata that's signed on the download.rockylinux repository yours. And we can do that again with an advisory ID if we wanted to. So
I know Greg's laughing at the Vim one, so
I'll grab Vim. Let's update Vim. Update.
Don't mock the Vim. You don't want to talk bad about Vim.
That's still my favorite text editor. I can't convert. I'm too old.
Is it still POSIX standard?
I believe.
I think it is too.
I also use Vim.
Yes.
Then it It is. It has been validated. Then 3 out of 3 senior webinar engineers choose Vim.
Choose
We
Vim.
win.
So as well as doing it with the CV number, you can also pass in an advisory number. And advisories, as you can see here, have multiple packages associated with them. If you had to pull in any of one of these, they'd have to be pulled in anyways as dependencies. But the final way that you can just update your system and make sure it has all the security vulnerabilities patched is just saying dnf update -- security. And so that's going to go ahead and install the other 2 advisories that were available. And now our system, if we try to run that again, dnf update -- security should say nothing to do. And likewise, if we do a dnf update info, it is empty. So we can see all of the security vulnerabilities that are patched on our system by passing dnf update info -- list -- all. And so that is at least 3 ways to update, make sure your system has all of the Rocky Linux security updates.
It's better than the way I do it. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
And one thing I can go back and just touch on is Peridot, the build system that we're working on, actually incorporates all of this as part of that build system. So it is slated to be open source here very soon, if it's not already. And this means that organizations can actually leverage that, and they can actually even they can maintain some of this even themselves if they wish to.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely. Collaboration and people using the system to help them accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish is very much one of the principles we want out of it.
All right, so we talk about sharing, we talk about being open. What's keeping a contributor from putting something into this that is malicious?
I think the biggest thing that prevents malicious acts or malicious packages or really any sort of wrongdoing is that same transparency. Because all of the builds are auditable, you can see exactly what went into them. You can get the artifacts. We sign everything with our GPG keys. It's obviously not impossible. Security is it's a net, not something that you can block completely. It would be, I think, difficult to get something in. We use PRs, as I mentioned before. We take security very seriously in terms of not giving people access to things that they don't need access to. That comes down to sanity around admin accounts and making sure that people aren't using admin accounts for daily drivers, and having approvals on code being merged in that will affect the building of packages and everything else. So we took a kind of hint from Fedora and other projects like Debian, OpenInfra, and other Linux distributions with how they perform transparency and mentorship and the auditing of resources that come out of there. And so yeah, in short, no, someone couldn't inject a nasty something into a package without some alarms bells being raised and without hopefully someone taking a notice. But again, humans are infallible, and that's part of, I think, a bigger discussion in general. We saw that last year with some commits that were being made as part of a research project to the Linux kernel. So that's another challenge as a distribution of packages as well, is you have to not only worry about the safety and security of your distribution, but also what's going into it too.
I was going to bring up that point as well. This is the same for pretty much every open source project that exists. As long as you have a process for how are you verifying and maintaining every bit of code that's coming into the project through transparency, auditing, merge requests, PRs, whatever your policy is, however you're bringing that in, and also keeping accountable in terms of who are the people that are contributing, who are the people that have commit access, and those people that have commit access really, how do you make sure that you have multiple people doing reviews? All of these sorts of processes are designed to not only facilitate good code, contributions to the software, but also to catch if somebody is doing something malicious, and to give people trust over time in such a way that lots of people can be part of the project. And that's the goal, is to increase, the breadth of people who want to be part of that project. But also, how are you managing and mitigating security risks to that? So what I want to mention is this is not specific to Rocky Linux. It's pervasive throughout all of open source, and we're doing the same sort of things that every open source project would do in terms of that transparency, auditing, and so on and so forth. And the infrastructure, I think, is really designed in a very smart way, putting security as being one of the primary tenets in terms of what we're doing. And the Rocky project itself has a very active security team within the project. And so not only is infrastructure development, contributors and whatnot thinking of security as a kind of number one facet to the project, but we also have a number of people that have a high degree of say regarding that infrastructure and regarding how are we doing things and how are we creating policies around security. So security is definitely kind of one of our number one priorities, as is community, and creating a very large, diverse, inclusive, open source project, and then balancing the two and coming up with that infrastructure necessary to be able to do that, to be able to allow contributions coming from even casual contributors, and bringing it in and including it into the project in a way that does not risk any sort of security, any security issues. It does not bring up any security issues. So that's really what we've been doing. As Neil mentioned before, the infrastructure that we started off building is tremendously awesome, based on the Fedora infrastructure, Koji, and all of the other pieces of that coming from the Fedora team. They've done a remarkable job pulling all that together and creating a platform for building operating systems. Our next stab at that, again, Peridot, is basically taking that and turning that into a cloud native architecture where I think we're going to be able to get even more transparency and more auditability into that environment, and basically persisting every artifact that we can out of that and making that publicly accessible is, again, I think, going to be hugely important. And again, Neil said this, but just to reiterate, that software bill of materials, the SBOM, is really critical, and we've actually gotten a number of large organizations that are very security focused asking for that and driving for that. So that's something that's a huge priority on our shoulders.
Very good. I feel like we should just sit here and stop and just do a long pause and see if people start asking questions, kind of do the silence, right?
The awkward
if you guys
pause.
Exactly. If you guys have any questions, please shoot them over. We'd love to answer them. We've got some time here. If not, we can make Greg tell us more stories. Come on, you've got to have more security stories, Greg.
Oh, I've got a really good one, but only if nobody asks any questions. And I hope people ask questions because it's more fun to answer questions than tell stories.
None yet. Let's have a story. I love it. I don't sneeze again. Sorry about that.
So I may get in trouble for this one.
The best stories then.
So a couple people from the Rocky team and others have heard this story before. But when I was at DOE, we had a intern that would always leave his terminal logged in, and it would leave his computer. And we've given this person, lots of crap, saying you got to lock your screen when you walk away. This is a government facility. You got to lock your screen. And he just wouldn't do it. And it wasn't, he wasn't trying to be malicious, or it wasn't he just wasn't used to doing it. So he'd walk away and want it. So one day he walked away, and I come over to his computer and I see not only is it logged in, but he's got a root terminal open. And so I quickly change his password and root's password to the system, and then I lock the screen and I walk away. And I go back to my desk in my office, and his desk was outside outside my office. And so I hear him come back, and I'm just kind of listening, and I hear him trying. I can hear him getting frustrated, getting concerned. And so after a little bit of struggling, I go out there and I say, "What's going on?" And he says, "I don't know. My computer's not working. I can't get into it. I can't log in." And I said, "You want me to try?" He goes, "What are you gonna do?" And I said, let me just try it real quick and see what I can do." So I'm sitting at his login prompt and type something, hit enter, and it logs in. And he's looking at me like, "What did you just do?" I said, "Oh, no, 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 it's no worries." I said, "I put a backdoor into every CentOS system in the world."
Oh
And
no.
and then I said, "Yeah, there you go. Cool. Make sure you fix your password." And so I walked away. Apparently, this person contacted security team and told them that I have put a backdoor into every CentOS system in the world. And yeah, that did not go over very well with the security group, who then very quickly came into my office asking me all sorts of questions. And I was able to use that awkward silence thing to my benefit, and just kind of maintain that. But it was a little nerve-wracking few minutes, and then I shared with them what I did, and that I did not, in fact, put a backdoor into every CentOS system in the world. Um, but yeah. So
Oh, it's fantastic.
everybody, lock your screen terminal,
Lock your screens.
especially if I'm around.
Cruel. That's the only word I have.
But this person learned the lesson.
Yeah, they did, but they never walked away with it unlocked again. So we do have a question that came in asking us to repeat the FIPS compliance status.
In terms of status, that is currently in progress. The process of doing FIPS certification is quite lengthy, especially considering that we just went from 140-2 to 140-3, and there were some changes that are going to be necessary as part of that compliance. Excuse me. And we're expecting that we're going to have to be making some code changes to get that certification. So at best, we're looking at probably another 6 months. At worst, we're probably looking at another, I'd say, 10 months. It's really hard to say. We do have an organization that we're working very closely with on that, and it's in progress. The goal is, again, it's going to be for Rocky 8.5, and yeah, I think that's the high level gist of it. Once we get that FIPS compliance, we're also going to go after additional security accreditations that are dependent upon that FIPS compliance. Then what we're also going to be doing is having specific point releases, which we are going to target for updates on FIPS compliance. So if probably we won't have a FIPS compliance on 8.5, 8.6, 8.7, and so on and so forth, it'll probably be 8.5, and then it may be 8.7. We may skip one, and then it may be 8.9. We're going to have to wait and see kind of how long it takes and what the lay of the land is at that point. But the goal is to have multiple versions. As you may know, FIPS compliance is a certification of a particular operating system patch set or release set. So once you've updated those RPMs are no longer compliant, because it validates a particular binary release of a package. So we will have to continue doing FIPS updates long term, and we are planning on doing that.
Very nice. I think one of the other questions that I've gotten asked quite a bit lately, as people move to Rocky 8.5, is when can they start playing with a beta of Rocky 9? Question I get a lot.
I've gotten that one as well too. We are currently in the process of building and testing packages and build processes. As I think Neil mentioned, and I'll let Neil give more definite and concrete information if there is any to be shared. But we are doing this in conjunction with the new build system. So we kind of have two things that we're doing simultaneously. And the goal is, again, once 9 is out, it'll be all built on the new build system as well. So that's delaying the beta a little bit, but we don't think that's going to delay the release at all. As a matter of fact, we're hoping to have the release as soon as absolutely possible. Neil, I'll hand it over to you to give more concrete information on 9.
Sure.
Awkward pause.
Awkward pause for sure. We're in the middle of planning it. We're not planning, but executing and planning. A lot of it can be followed along on the Mattermost chat for Rocky at chat.rockylinux.org. There's a planning board essentially in the development channel that we're tracking the tasks for Rocky 9 and kind of the roadmap that's going on there.
Excellent, thank you. Jonathan has a question it's more about FIPS, asking about Rocky Linux and NIST 800/171 or CMMC environments. Or are those mostly separate concerns?
You caught me. I'm literally Googling those right now. I'm going to need have a little bit more time, but I will get back to you, Jonathan, on that. I don't have an answer for you specifically. And Google was not fast enough for me, so or I was not fast enough in reading it. But I'll get back to you on that, Jonathan.
Yeah, we got 2 questions we owe Jonathan answers back on. Perfect. Well, guys, if we don't have any more questions, we are pretty much up on time. So I appreciate you guys coming. Again, like and subscribe, stay in touch with us. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out, hit us up, let us know what you're thinking. We appreciate it. Thanks for the time. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Neil.
I'm glad you didn't ask me for another story, Zane.
No, out of time. Sorry.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.